had one patient who tested positive on the sixth, seventh day. His relative was positive. It was a case of a
Okay.
fibula. So I, in fact, operated, did bilateral neck tracheostomy and fibula, and ultimately that patient was positive when we operated.
Okay. Okay.
Everybody did well. Nobody. Uh, I think
Developed
the
any
risk right
symptoms?
now is, I think, with the kind of protection that we all use, the risk is more, in that social part rather than.
Correct.
So that is
Yes,
scary.
absolutely right. Yeah. More than the disease, the social aspect is more traumatizing and unpredictable.
Yeah, in the hospital we are kind of sure what to use, and those respirators and N95s. But other thing is that when you're outside and you let your guard down, that's where
Yes,
the
that's
problem.
where. I don't know how it is going to pan out in future.
Yeah,
And until the vaccination comes, I think it's going to be chaos.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Our situations over there.
We are continuing to do our electives. Started our cleft surgeries as usual.
Okay,
Trauma is on the rise because during COVID times, I think many people ended up buying two-wheelers
okay.
because you can crisscross through the small areas, and the car was being stopped at many checkpoints. So many people bought two-wheelers. Now that lockdown is over, the number of vehicles on the road has increased. That has again pushed our trauma census to a higher side. So trauma we are doing on a regular basis, but
Okay.
problem is the cost has gone up a little bit more than usual. PPEs, testing, things like that.
Cleft, you are probably doing only, you're not doing HRCT, just doing the RT-PCR.
No, just RTP. So even before they come for admission, we ask them to get COVID testing done, and we take them for admission only if the test is negative. Otherwise, we don't. This is something which I've been following so far so good. But even in some of our pediatric patients, they turned out to be positive after getting admitted. Some of them had some symptoms, fever, and our pediatricians insisted on testing, and then they turned out to be positive. We had to send them back.
Mhm.
So a lot of confusion. The uh, In terms of anesthesia, I think we have been asked strictly to restrict ourselves to one case a day, not to take
Yeah,
up too many.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think, and they say, I think, yeah, not more than one case. Absolutely. So
not
that,
more than one case.
yeah,
Correct.
yeah. I think your body requires rest, cannot take too much of high also.
Yeah, I think it's the constant exposure and the viral load is a major determinant here, right? I guess uh, as long as we keep that distance and give ourselves time to recuperate,
Yeah.
I think we can. So far, we have been surviving. So let us see. What's the time like? Time is 9:05. Let's see who has come. Venkat sir is supposed to join. We'll start. We'll wait for another 5 minutes and then start.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Okay.
So oncology reconstruction work, you do it yourselves? How does it happen? You
Some part of it I do it myself. Some I have
okay?
a plastic colleague.
Okay. Okay.
Our workload in oncology is pretty high. So we would want that we have, whenever possible, we are, working in a team. So
Yes.
for re-exploration, we have this. But
Okay.
we end up doing three on a regular situation, three to four, to even sometimes five, but at least 3 to 4 cases in a week oncology.
Oh, that's a good volume.
Yeah.
That means it's a high volume center then. Okay.
I don't know. This is, but this is an all purely private practice patients. No yojana, nothing.
Okay. Okay. Oh, so I think that part of India has got more patients then.
When the Yojana things was not there, that time we were doing quite a few days in a week, 2 cases in a day.
Okay.
With the Yojana, a lot of poor patients have kind of drifted to the Yojana schemes. So that is good for us also. Don't want to operate too much. Want to do whatever you can in the best possible way. And we are all getting old also, right?
That is true. Or we have to fit like Venkat sir, playing badminton every day.
Good morning, Praveen.
Morning, sir. Badminton,
Ipla shuttle over.
Sir, COVID, no COVID, earthquake, rain, flood, Venkat sir will
so far, so good.
Badminton. Awesome. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Biruni, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to all of you. Rahul, good morning.
Good morning, sir. So today's topic, I would want, a lot of input from all the centers, because zygomatic complex is, indeed a complex thing. When to operate, when not to operate.
Yeah,
Everybody has their own views. So I think we will share our view, but I think we would want to learn from other centers also as to what they do.
And probably it is the most common type of trauma we come across.
Yes.
Very common.
Yes.
And the treatment is from no treatment, when to operate, and how much. So this presentation is basically because we want. I think all the presentations have been small. Not very extensive, because we want this to go on and on. But we are going to focus on a couple of points, which is basically the aesthetic part and aesthetic consideration. So we are not going to talk too much on 1 point, 2 point, 3 point fixation. Though in our debate we may, but we don't want to, cover that too much in our PowerPoint or keynote slides. But basically the approach to the zygoma, I had some, interesting cases where the zygoma was badly displaced. Patient had a lot of soft tissue fat, and we didn't do anything. And I have, follow-ups of them, of not doing anything in a zygoma.
Yes.
If you look at the CT, you will definitely say that this is a surgical case. But the soft tissue volume was so thick, it kind of camouflaged. Probably we would have operated, we would have done more harm than good for these patients. But I think time is limited.
No, absolutely. Very similar experience what we have. Okay. Absolutely. 100% what you just said. Yeah.
I have a case. I was just discussing with my fellow. I don't know if you have the time. I will still put it. I said that all the centers are going to murder me if they say that I don't. Absolutely, there won't be discussion. I will be murdered. But I didn't operate that case and badly displaced zygoma.
Yeah.
But my intuition said, let me just wait on this. I don't know. If time permits, we will. Otherwise, for some other day. Just the conservative management of this patient, and hugely displaced zygoma and arch. Because that patient would have required a 4-point fixation.
I understood. Yeah.
And I thought that I should give this patient a trial. Patient was not very keen if avoided. So 1 second, I'll just take this.
Yeah, no problem. Morning, Kannan, sir. Rahul, the presentation is going to be from your side, or
I will my fellow Dr. Neeraj will present, but I have kind of did little amendments today morning. So he will say next slide and I will kind of, so he will present, he will speak. Is that possible?
Okay. I think it should be.
I can share.
Shilpa ma'am, is that okay? Can it be done? I think it should be okay. I think we can go ahead and we can start.
Should we start?
Yeah, but you can share your screen. Yes.
Okay. So नीरज आप अपने आप को अनम्यूट कर दीजिए.
Yes, sir. I've done this, sir. Yes,
Are
sir.
you ready?
Yes, sir.
Chalo. Good. Good luck to you.
Thank you, sir.
Karo. Okay.
Very good morning to all the mentors and my fellow colleagues. I, Dr. Neeraj Bansal, on behalf of Shubhecha Multi-Speciality Hospital, Vadodara, Gujarat, is presenting on a topic, cosmetic consideration in the zygomatic complex trauma surgery. Next. Next, sir.
I can't. Praveen or who is our?
Shilpa is our Shilpa ma'am.
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes.
I think Rahul has some problem.
Yes, tell me. Okay.
Dr. Neeraj will be actually, is it possible that Dr. Neeraj presents and I will do the slide share? Is that possible?
Okay, I made Dr. Neeraj Bansal as co-host. Now he can share the screen.
No. He doesn't have the presentation.
Okay.
I have the presentation. Is that possible?
You have to mail him, sir.
Okay. Neeraj, what I would suggest is you present from your side. We will, I had edited the videos, but we can just go ahead and present from your side, Neeraj. We'll forget the couple of slides which I added. If possible, Shilpa, is it possible that at the end I have 2-3 slides? I can be the, I can start and last 3 slides.
Okay.
Right now, Dr. Neeraj will start and the last 3 slides I will take over. Is that possible?
Yeah. Yes.
So can you make co-host Dr. Neeraj?
Yes, done, sir. Now just you share the PPT with him.
Yeah, he has the PPT. Neeraj, you have your PPT?
Okay.
Yes, sir, I have my PPT.
हाँ, तो आप screen share करके चालू कर दीजिए.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ma'am, I'm not able to go to next slide.
Same problem I have.
Can you start, instead of playing, can you start the slideshow?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yes. Slideshow and then from current slide.
Same problem, sir. Still
Yeah,
same
I
problem.
had the same problem. I couldn't.
Let's try it once more. Go to slideshow and then let's see. No.
Okay, I will click respective slides.
I think,
Okay, fine, yeah.
So you don't do the slideshow, I think, and just
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. We can see the slides.
So, despite being the strength and stability that is conferred to the zygoma, it is the most vulnerable to trauma because of its prominent position. So for the management of such conditions, we have to consider a balance between the both function as well as aesthetics. In cases of open reduction of zygoma injuries, for their management, our main goal is to give a patient an almost imperceptible scar in the post-operative period. So for that aim, we have to give our incisions in the skin creases that is not visible post-operatively. So for this goal, I will first discuss some textbook pros and cons of various periorbital approaches. Then I will describe 2 cases that we have done. And finally, I would request our mentors, our experts, to share their perspective regarding the same. So apart from using the existing lacerations, the periorbital area can be approached through the external or the conjunctival surface of the lower eyelid, or it can be approached through the skin of the lateral brow or through the upper eyelid. Coming to the transcutaneous incision through the lower eyelid, these 3 incisions, the subciliary, subtarsal, and infraorbital incision, these 3 incisions vary at the level at which they are given. So subciliary incision, also called as a lower blepharoplasty incision, it is given approximately 2 mm below the margin of the lower eyelid. So the advantage of this subciliary incision is that it has an almost imperceptible scar and it can be extended laterally. But the disadvantage is being the ectropion and scleral show. The subciliary incision can be done in 3 ways. Only the skin dissection, in the skin is quite thin and there is more scar contraction. The skin muscle flap, in which there is the motor denervation of the supratarsal muscle fibers. So there is the loss of tonicity. The other is the skin muscle dissection. That is the step technique or the converse technique. In that, the supratarsal muscle fibers are prevented from dissection, as well as there are the lesser chances of complication that we can find in the other 2 approaches. That is the darkening of skin of septal buttonhole ring, ectropion, and sometimes entropion. Coming to the subtarsal incision is given just below the tarsal plate, approximately 4 to 7 mm below the eyelid margin. So in comparison to the subciliary incision, subtarsal incision has lesser incidence of the ectropion and scleral show, but the scar is more prominent than the subciliary. When this infraorbital incision is taken, it almost invariably shows scar to some extent. Also, this infraorbital incision cannot be extended much laterally, and this infraorbital incision is given in the thicker skin of the cheek rather than the thin skin of the eyelid. So there is much scar contraction in this. So as I already told, the subciliary incision can be extended laterally. It can be extended laterally 2 cm past the lateral canthus in the natural skin trees or in the crow's in elderly to prevent damage to the anterior temporal branch of the facial nerve, which passes the zygomatic arch approximately 3 cm lateral to the lateral canthus tendon. Coming to the transconjunctival approach, the transconjunctival approach can be taken preseptally or retroseptally. It is also called as inferior fornix approach. So this approach is a simple rapid approach. The retroseptal approach does not involve any skin or muscle dissection. So it has less scar contracture. The scar is well hidden in the conjunctiva. But this approach, when it is not extended, is quite limited exposure. And it is technique sensitive and requires high surgical precision. But when this technique is extended, it can be extended laterally through the lantern conthottomy or medially to the transcaruncular incision up to the level of levator aponeurosis. So it gives an approximately 270-degree panorama exposure of the entire orbit. Also, this transconjunctival incision has a incidence of entropion, which is difficult to correct and more inconvenient to the patients. Next is the supraorbital approach, or also called as lateral brow approach. So lateral brow incision is given within the confines of the eyebrow hairs, but this incision cannot be maneuvered easily because the skin is thicker in this area. Also, the chances that there are the hair loss in this area due to the scar alopecia. Also, the problem is it cannot be extended much laterally. However, it can be extended medially up to the supraorbital foramen. This approach is usually used for the East Asian population. In those patients in East Asian population, the next approach, the upper eyelid approach, does not lend itself for incision. So in that cases, the brow approach is used. The upper eyelid approach has a thin skin and it can be maneuvered easily over the lateral orbital wall or the upper orbit for FZ exposure. It can be extended laterally also. So when we have discussed these so many approaches, we are confused that what approach should we actually use. Suppose if we have two fractures, a fracture at the FZ region and a fracture at the infraorbital region. So what approach should be used? So the article from the Journal of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery by Dr. Ishida. It is a Japanese retrospective study. It is a 20-year-old study conducted from 1992 to 2012. So in this article, they shows a paradigm shift from initially a subciliary incision to the standard transconjunctival incision to finally the extended transconjunctival approach. So what they were previously using two incisions for the exposure of FZ, one incision for the exposure of FZ and other incision for the FZ for the exposure of infraorbital rim in cases where coronal approach is not used. So for the exposure of FZ, they were using lateral brow approach, and for the exposure of infraorbital rim, they were using transconjunctival approach. But when using these two incisions, the surgeon has to move from one narrow field to another narrow field, and the surgeon has to move back and forth in these areas. It is quite inconvenient for the surgeon. Also, for the exposure of the lateral orbital wall, there is a tangential approaching angle. So it is difficult for the surgeon to expose the lateral orbital wall or the sphenozygomatic suture. But when they have used the extended transconjunctival approach, they found that through the single incision, they were able to expose the entire infraorbital rim, floor, the FZ suture, and the lateral wall. Also, the other advantage of this using this incision is in the cases of where the projection of the face is lost, or there's a severe communication in the other areas where fixation is not possible. So the surgeon has to reduce and fix the sphenozygomatic suture. So sphenozygomatic suture can be easily accessed through this extended transconjunctival approach. So should we actually use this extended transconjunctival approach, or should we use the two approaches? Because in young cases, in young patients, there is no prominent scar crease. There's no prominent skin crease or the RSTL. So what should we do in young patients? So here's our first case. This is a case of a young boy who has sustained a middle energy trauma to the right zygomatic orbital region. So in that case, fractures were seen at the FZ region, infraorbital region, and the buttress region. For the exposure of this area, we have an incision at the upper eyelid, and the most prominent skin crease in this case is the subtarsal skin crease. So we have chosen subtarsal skin crease because it is more near to the margin. So initially, in every cases or in cases where there is entrapment of these muscles, we have to first use the inferior tendon and do the motion for the force reduction test. After doing the force reduction test, the incisions were taken. Before incisions, temporary transverse suture was taken. After doing the temporary transverse suture, for this the subtarsal approach, we have first marked the skin, and then the skin only incision was given. After that, we have infiltrated the vasoconstrictor. We have waited for some time. Then skin muscle dissection was done up to the subperiosteal plane to the infraorbital rim. Then periosteal incision was given approximately 3 to 5 mm below the infraorbital rim. After doing the subperiosteal dissection, the fracture was exposed, reduced, and fixed. Similarly, for this eyebrow approach, the incision was given. If the upper supratarsal crease is present, then the incision is given in supratarsal crease. Otherwise, we can use the upper or lower limb of the standard blepharoidal plastic incision, or we can give the incision at least 6 mm above the lateral canthus tendon, or at least 10 mm above the center of the eyebrow. So this incision was taken. Then muscle dissection was done up to the supraterrestrial plane. Thus, the periosteal incision was given at the center of the lateral orbital rim. Subperiosteal dissection was done. Fracture was exposed, reduced, and fixed. For closure of this incision, the subtarsal incision, the closure was done with the periosteal incision, and then we have done subcutaneous incision. For the eyebrow, the eyelid incision, it is a 3-layered closure: the periosteal, muscle, and the skin subcutaneous closure. And finally, a frost suture was taken to prevent the shortening of the lower eyelid. This is the post-operative picture of this patient. In this immediate post-op, there's a slightly perceptible scar and slight darkening of the skin on the right eye. But when we see the 1-year post-operative picture, the scar is almost imperceptible, and it is almost mirror the contralateral side. So we cannot see which side is affected. So another case, this is a case of a young lady. She also sustained a medial energy trauma through the right zygomatic area. Apart from the fractures of the FZ, infraorbital rim, and the buttress, she also sustained a trauma to the floor. So apart from using the standard approach that I have already discussed in the previous case, we have taken a transconjunctival approach with lateral canthotomy. So for this case, our lateral canthotomy incision is limited lateral canthotomy incision because she's a young patient and there's no increase. So we have taken this lateral canthotomy for 4 mm, just 4 mm. So for this incision, firstly, a vasoconstrictor was infiltrated. We have waited for 7 to 10 minutes for vasoconstrictor to diffuse and to prevent any distortion of the surrounding area. After, if lateral canthotomy is performed, it should be the first incision. The lateral canthotomy was done for approximately 4 mm. After that, the lower eyelid was still tethered to the inferior limb of the lateral canthal tendon. Then a vertical incision was given in the lateral canthal tendon. Cantholysis was performed. After that, the attention is directed towards the transconjunctival incision. We everted the lower eyelid with the help of Demare retractor. We have used preseptal approach. So for preseptal approach, our incision was just below the inferior margin of the inferior tarsus. We can say our incision was just above the junction of the orbital septum with the lower lid retractors. We have given incisions, and our dissection plane was the preseptal plane up to the infraorbital rim. After that, periosteal incision was given, and subperiosteal dissection was done to expose the infraorbital rim and floor for fixation and reduction. So orbital floor was also plated, a mesh was given. For the protection of cornea, in this case, we have used a transconjunctival flap. We have used a conjunctival flap. So what we've done is we have sutured the posterior of the conjunctiva with the upper eyelid. So this was the approach. And for the closure of this incision, firstly, the periosteal closure was done. And after that, the tension is directed toward the inferior canthopexy. So for inferior canthopexy, we have to grab the remaining portion of the inferior limb of the lateral canthus. If the inferior limb is not present, then we can take a bite from the lower tarsus. Then after taking a bite from the lower tarsus, it is approximately with the superior limb of the lateral canthus tendon. At this point, the suture is tied. The suture is not tied, it is just approximated. After that, attention is directed towards the transconjunctival incision. It is closed. Then finally, our inferior canthopexy suture is tied. Then for the lateral canthopexy, lateral cantholysis suture, we have first done the subcutaneous closure, then the skin closure. So this is the post-operative picture of this patient, and we can barely see any scar in this case. This is a sample video showing how to give a transconjunctival incision with a conjunctival flap.
Neeraj, now last couple of slides, that this next video is little long. I have an edited video.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
But we can
Thank you, sir.
appreciate that the severe displacement, even a severe displacement, here only transconjunctival has been given, but no cantholysis or canthotomy has been done. Can I do the slide sharing? Is it possible? Shilpa?
Yes, sir. Dr. Bansal, you have to stop sharing.
Yes, ma'am.
So here a running 6-0 Vicryl rapid has been taken. We use cotton buds over here. We see that we don't use gauze pieces near the cornea. Lot of irrigation with saline so that the eye is kept moist, and that's how the closure is done. And this is the same case. You can see the severe displacement. In this case, we could get away with a single point fixation. But what I want to tell is, even if there is a floor fracture and a rim fracture, a purely transconjunctival approach without a canthotomy also can be used. A canthotomy and a cantholysis is reserved for severely displaced fractures. Otherwise, you can do only a pure transconjunctival approach. You can go and release the brachial canthal, ligament as you go higher up, and yet not do a cantholysis as such. So this is for the younger trainees. I would want to think that this zygoma surgery is an aesthetic surgery, and we need to get a good bony reduction. But please remember that we should not give any scar to the patient. First, do no harm. So that is extremely important. And with this, we finish our presentation. I think we can go for discussion. Any questions or comments, please, are welcome.
Excuse me, I am Dr. Giri, Professor Giri from Ramchandra.
Yeah.
This is my first question, first case. You have gone through subsidiary, I think.
Yes.
For that, I will go through the vestibular incision. I will reach the infraorbital. If there is no entrapment or any diplopia, I will dissect the infraorbital nerve slowly. I will elevate the thing, and then through the thing, I will put the lower border plate instead of going for another extraoral incision. Okay. Upper blood fasciae is acceptable. For instead of lower subsidiary, I will go through the vestibular incision. I will reach the infraorbital. I will elevate the nerve, slowly dissect the nerve and elevate, and then I will put a 2-plate or 4-hole plate with cap, and like that that is my thing. I will do that one. Any point of discussion about that one?
Yes, I would also, I think it's definitely one way of doing it. What we have found is we want our subperiosteal dissection to be minimal. We have noted that even if we have got a perfect radiologically fixed zygoma, our aesthetics can be compromised when we have stripped the zygoma of all the musculature. It gives it a mask-like face appearance. So first, our thing is that of course that it should the approach should not be visible. Other is that we want to avoid an extensive subperiosteal dissection of the fractured side. Third is, what we have noted is that according to what you're saying goes along with the AOCMF references, but we have seen a lot of times, probably because each case is so different, but a lot of times in our cases, they have a lot of comminution at the ZM buttress now. Now, if we have to plate, either you have to connect the zygomatic body to the nasomaxillary buttress, or if you go to the regular L-shaped plate, it will breach on the roots of the teeth, or we won't get a good fixation. So if you are going to do a minimally 1-point fixation, though this is out of the scope of this presentation, but since the point is brought up, what we feel in our hands that we will end up damaging the roots of the teeth. We will not be happy with our fixation. That's what we would feel in this case. But this is a point again for discussion.
Just to add to what you just mentioned, Rahul, I would also use the same approach. But then the transconjunctival again gives an added advantage of exploring the orbital floor.
Yeah.
Because in such cases, most often after you have done the reduction, there can be an incarceration of the muscle. And that has to be ruled out. So the infraorbital, vestibular incision, of course, can be used, but then certain disadvantages have to be taken into account.
I would not feel that I would be able to, again, that's any approach to the rim, as you said, infraorbital gives you the advantage of peeping, because whenever you're doing this, I'm sure that we'll all peep into the orbital floor and to see that everything is okay. So that's a absolutely relevant point which I missed. So that is an absolute reason to go for this kind of an incision. Other is I don't think in this case I would be able to plate without jeopardizing the vitality of the teeth in this case.
Yes.
And still not be very happy with the fixation that I've achieved.
Yes, totally agree to the point. Yeah. So any comments from sirs, Gurwani sir, Kannan sir, Venkat sir?
I think transconjunctival in this situation is better than infraorbital. It is little cumbersome also, and achieving the instrument of displacement probably when we go into approach. Reduction may be difficult,
So we are losing
but
your voice.
We are going for infraorbital.
Sir, Gurwani sir, your voice is breaking.
Yeah, your voice is breaking.
And my point is not by infraorbital approach, but through the vestibular approach. I will go through the vestibular. I elevate. I'll reach infraorbital margin. There, because it's only minimally displaced fracture, through the vestibular approach, I will dissect the thing with mosquitoes, the infraorbital nerve, slowly thing, and then I will plate the infraorbital margin through the vestibular approach. I have examined the thing, the neuropraxia and everything is within 2 to 3 months it will come down without much damage to the nerve. The thing I will approach to the vestibular for this type of fractures. If there is no incarceration of orbital fat or anything in the floor of the thing, pre-operatively I will examine that one. Instead of, I will use only one extraoral approach than the 2 extraoral approach. One thing I will go to the vestibular approach for this case.
Okay.
That is my point.
I
never do infraorbital. I will usually go by transconjunctival. I never approach by the infraorbital. But this case, my point of approach is through the vestibular. I will reach the infraorbital. I use my Austin retractor nicely to bring. I will keep it in the infraorbital region. I slowly elevate the bone. I see the frontozygomatic suture and infraorbital suture and the buttress region. Everything is approximated correctly. Then I will say the thing, everything.
Anybody who's giving an extended skin incision for the transconjunctival and plating the FZ with an extended cutaneous transconjunctival incision? My thoughts on it, I'm against it because I feel that you're creating a crease. I'm always feel that whenever you have to respect the skin creases, but I would like the opinion of other centers. Are you using an extended skin incision, extended crow's feet incision for a transconjunctival and not giving a superior palpebral or lateral brow?
Dr. Rahul.
We have done it in a few of our patients where we have extended for almost 1 centimeter along with the transconjunctival. just to
How about your
approach.
experience, Praveen, in terms of
So-
ease of plating, number one, and other is the perceptibility. See, when there is an old age and you have a crow's feet, then it's justified. But if a young patient, would you be scared to give? I would be little concerned. So I would want your opinion. What was
That's
your
a
experience?
valid point here. I would prefer such an approach only in 50 plus, 40 plus patients, not on young patients.
Praveen,
Uh,
Praveen,
so, yes.
Praveen, this is Anant here. Hi.
Hello, sir.
How are you? Good morning,
I'm fine,
Dr.
sir.
Rahul, and hi, Praveen.
Good morning.
Having raised this question, transconjunctival extended, this is one approach which I use very frequently.
Okay.
Um, though you feel that there is a perceptible skin crease till about 3 months, after that it settles out beautifully, because I have been using this for quite some time.
Okay.
Not only for the lower eyelid, but even for the upper eyelid. I do a sub-brow with a Stallard modification,
All right.
which goes into the lateral orbitotomy approach kind.
Yes.
So in both these approaches, even though there is a perceptible increase in the crease definition for an immediate period of about 2 to 3 months, after that there is hardly anything. It doesn't show at all.
Okay.
And I feel it's sometimes a good approach to follow. I'm not saying everybody to go by it hard and fast.
Okay.
But it's a fantastic approach. The key is not in going subperiosteal. The key is going supraperiosteal over the entire orbital lateral orbital rim. For a large amount of space, you can do tunneling.
Okay.
And then lift the whole subcutaneous pocket upward, and then open only in the place where you want. Contrary to the belief that it has to be subperiosteal tunneling from the lateral, the canthotomy area to the frontozygomatic. It's not subperiosteal actually. It's actually supraperiosteal dissection there.
Right.
You have beautiful tunnel, and you can have a huge skin envelope which can include a lot of space around. After that, you open in a place which you feel is fit for the kind of implant you're using.
Okay. Thanks for that input. I remember my postgraduate teacher, Dr. David Toro, in that like 97, 98, giving this approach. And I don't remember long-term follow-ups, but I think your experience will definitely encourage me to think of giving a single incision. I will probably start with select patients and then take it from there. But thank you for your comments.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Any questions from the fellows and any more further discussion comments? Look, I have a question for Rahul. Rahul, when do you choose between cantholysis and not cantholysing while performing a transconjunctival approach?
If I feel like this, I have to do work both on. In this case, I would probably have struggled, with without a cantholysis.
Yes.
But if it's a pure, if it's just a straightforward zygoma, not much floor to be done, then most cases, you can like how we do a transoral approach, kind of stretch and cut the periosteum, and with a small incision, like we do in a Lafort one, give, a small incision, like up to the second premolar, yet we can go all the way up to the pterygomaxillary fissure. Same way we can with a pure transconjunctival without a cantholysis do quite a bit. But when I started off, I'm sure all of us who were giving transconjunctivals, we all started off with straight away first giving all canthotomy and cantholysis and going in. But I think with more and more experience, you become more confident of avoiding the cantholysis.
I would like to share a personal experience on this. So this was during my initial stages when I just started off transconjunctival. So I did not prefer using cantholysis, and because of inadvertent retraction, there was a tear, and it led to a canalicular injury. And after that incident, I've started giving at least a small cantholysis invariably for all the patients. It kind of takes away the stress, the traction from the skin. Anand sir,
Praveen,
would you like to comment on that?
Praveen, thanks for the point. It was bang on target. Okay, it was bang on target. I feel it individual experience, and in my experience, I have done a cantholysis for every one of my transconjunctivals. The simple reason is I have faced the same problems. Remember that it is not mucosa where you can actually pull every side. The medial aspect has the canaliculus,
Yes.
and the that is a very tricky spot. For those who have actually tried to plate type 1 NOE through a transconjunctival approach with a concomitant zygoma, I think most of you will understand that the medial aspect dissection is extremely tricky. We think it is on a different plane, but you'll end up landing, causing a canalicular tear. And for that simple reason alone, to create a wider area of movement for the flap, I have been giving transconjunctivals only with a lateral cantholysis for every one of my case. Even if it is a small one or a big one, irrespective of it, it gives enormous freedom. And the second thing is, we all work with people who are used or acclimatized to assisting large areas with large retractors. Remember, we work on the oral cavity and cutaneous area. They are not used to holding a Demar or a cat's paw in the right way, and they have always exercised overzealous retraction. I think there is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong in either way. But if you want to be a cautious surgeon who is wary about your canaliculi, I think it's better to give a lateral cantholysis and then use more free retraction methods.
Yes.
Can I have a
Totally
rebuttal
agree with
point
you.
for this? Anant,
Yes.
and Praveen, I would actually not agree on this point, this particular canalicular, because whenever you are in doubt, I would give a transcaruncular with my transconjunctival, and
Yes.
I use a preceptal approach. See, if I'm doing a retroseptal approach and you are combining your transconjunctival with the transcaruncular, you need to cut the inferior oblique muscle and kind of reattach it. I
Yeah.
always give a preceptal approach. So whenever I'm in doubt, I would rather give a transcaruncular extension than to give a cantholysis if I am in doubt.
Dr. Rahul, one thing. You prefer a preceptal.
Preceptal.
Okay. Every time you detach the inferior oblique.
No, I don't. With the preceptal, you don't have to. With the retroseptal, if you give a transconjunctival, with the retroseptal, you're supposed to. I have never given a retroseptal
No, actually, a
approach.
retroseptal goes directly inside, behind the rim, actually.
Okay.
A preceptal will land on the rim. And if
Okay.
you're landing on the rim, then you'll have to detach the inferior oblique or dissect around it.
But you don't have to cut through it.
No, you don't have. You never cut through.
Yeah.
You either detach it subperiosteally, and invariably only when you're using a preceptal, you will land up with the inferior oblique. If you're going retroseptal with a transcaruncular, you will never touch the inferior oblique.
So, but what is your thought? If you give a slight
Problem is a transcaruncular is no, absolutely fine. Your technique is correct. If you're able to incorporate a transcaruncular, there is no need for extension on the lateral side. It's a very safe method and a fantastic thing to follow. But
and other thing is, when in doubt, give a small. Means I am.
Dr. Rahul, just
I mean, your point taken. I don't. I mean, I'm worried about extending my cutaneous.
One point for consideration here. I used a specific example, a type 1 NOE. In a type 1 NOE, you have to see the rim and the frontal process of maxilla, which is anterior to the inferior oblique.
Yes.
So even if you put a transcaruncular, you have to cross the inferior oblique and come anterior there.
Right.
A transcaruncular actually goes behind the inferior oblique.
Right.
Yeah. While in a medial wall fracture, your point is excellent.
Yeah.
Transconjunctival going transcaruncular would give fantastic approach.
Yeah, because you're on the
type 1 NOE. Not for a type 1 NOE. And
Absolutely.
type 1 NOE is more notorious for creating canalicular tears, iatrogenic.
Agreed.
This is just a point for the PGs. Please see, between ourselves, these are contentions we learned from each other. This is a beautiful point which Dr. Rahul has actually made. Please, when you start doing transconjunctivals, don't stop with that. Take liberty in using a transcaruncular approach, because once you master the transcaruncular, the floor and the medial wall are your mercy. You can actually play around everywhere. Thanks, Rahul. Fantastic.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Rahul, one more question. Any particular reason for your
Again,
preference for
for the
preceptor?
trainees, I would mid tarsal or even an infraorbital correctly placed. It's better to give a correctly placed infraorbital than a wrongly placed transconjunctival. So, but respect the creases is what I think I would like to, from this presentation is that those natural creases should be respected as far as possible.
Rahul, one question for you. For the benefit of the trainees, now, see, the infraorbital rim is comminuted. There's too much of a displacement. Would you still prefer a transconjunctival approach?
Yeah, I would. I don't think giving a subciliary or mid tarsal would be superior. When would I not give really bad? I mean, there is no, rim at all where I don't know, I'll be lost in that. That, yes, but comminution, maybe I would still be tempted to give. But yes, loss of infraorbital rim is there, and those kind of things, maybe no. So, I would feel that one should know all the approaches. I have ended up giving, though mid-tarsal is not my first incision, I would have explained patient about a transconjunctival, but some time back I had a patient with no movement of the eye, old fracture. There was symblepharon. The bulbar and the palpable conjunctiva was one unit. I had to, give a kind of almost like a lower mid-tarsal incision because otherwise you would, not help the patient. So I think we have to be flexible with our approaches. This is what I would like to tell.
And any particular reason for choosing preceptal over retroseptal approach?
No, my training, I guess. That's all. I would like to do a retroseptal, but I have no problems with the preceptal. And that's how, my professor, Dr. David, during my postgraduate days, I had seen him giving a preceptal. This is something which I learned to do.
Have you had any complications with preceptal follow-up patients so far?
I've had one redo. One other surgeon had done a subciliary and orbital infraorbital rim plating. I then went through a transconjunctival with a lateral canthotomy. The orbital floor I had redone. I think that is one patient that I had some entropion, but with time it did settle. So that was it.
Great. Any questions? Any further comments?
Praveen.
Sir, please, sir.
Praveen, the reason Dr. Rahul is actually preferring the transconjunctival for any kind of fracture is because he's using a preceptal. The preceptal is the best method of doing transconjunctival when you want to approach even a comminuted or a zero available infraorbital rim. It's the safest method because the plane of dissection is not dependent on the existence or non-existence of the rim. The plane of dissection is exclusively dependent on the plane of dissection you are maintaining. While in a retroseptal, the key is actually touching the posterior edge of the infraorbital rim. That is why people who are trained for the postseptal find it difficult when you have a comminuted infraorbital rim or an absent infraorbital rim. While he is not finding that difficulty, he is comfortably able to manage it because he takes a preseptal plane of dissection which leads him anywhere. He can comfortably operate.
So how about you guys?
And,
people, you are giving Anant, Praveen, and others. Are you giving preceptal, retroseptal?
I do both. My indication for preceptal is when I have a comminuted infraorbital rim or an absent infraorbital rim.
Okay.
For any rim that is intact, which means a pure blowout, I go retroseptal.
Okay.
I think very much the same from my side as well. But when I feel that there is a need for more surgical convenience and access in comminuted fractures, I would rather prefer subtarsal or subciliary with extension than transconjunctival.
I think this is where what Rahul said bears fruit, Praveen, because in a properly designed transconjunctival, like what he said, if you are able to incorporate a lateral extension as well as a transcaruncular, you can have 270 degrees of exposure. which is unrestricted. In fact, I think most people who are really fond of transconjunctivals will actually vouch with a transconjunctival more than transcutaneous. And the second thing is, just to add a note, the symblepharon, which Rahul said, a transconjunctival is actually a beautiful method to incorporate in a case having symblepharon, especially in the palpable as well as bulbar conjunctivas, because you can actually design your Z-plasty along with it. So in any case which has a symblepharon, generally we prefer to use a transconjunctival and then incorporate a Z-plasty into that.
Would you place a graft, a spacer graft, like a palatal mucosal graft?
Depends, Rahul. Yeah, depends on the defect size you're having.
Okay.
If you are able to generate flaps which can transpose, then yes. If not, we use mucosal grafts, which is convenient, and you can actually recreate the fornix very well. So I think that is also a good indication to actually use a transconjunctival.
But is this symblepharon you're talking about post-traumatic or otherwise? I'm talking about post-traumatic.
Post-traumatic.
Would
I'd like to add one more question at this juncture.
I would probably want, in some further cases, would like to share my extremely small experience with treating symblepharons, and I would like to probably, learn from yours also.
Just one more question for both Anand sir, Rahul, Ben. When there is gross periorbital edema and there is periorbital ecchymosis, what do you feel while performing transconjunctival when there is ecchymosis and chemosis in the patient? Would you wait for the chemosis to settle down and then do a transconjunctival?
Anand may have a different experience. I'll tell you from my experiences. If I have to go in rarely with the neurosurgeon on the same day of injury or the next day, and there's a lot of swelling, I may think of using a transcutaneous approach. In that case, I will give a pure subciliary approach. Even if, I will not look for the crease because there won't be a crease. I will be purely 2 millimeters below the lower eyelid and do a classical converse method. That's what I have done so far. Because if you end up giving a mid-tarsal, when the edema goes, it ends up looking like an infraorbital. So I would then not bother about any crease, go absolutely to and kind of follow the lower eyelid almost parallel to it with a gentle curve. And no imagination I would use in terms of where the crease would be. Anand?
Praveen and Rahul, yeah. One is, if there is edema, I'm not worried. If there is chemosis, I'm worried. The simple logic that I follow is, it is something like intraoral versus extraoral approach. Intraoral is very forgiving. You can make any kind of incision on the mucosa and still we are forgiven. It heals very well. Extraoral, on the other hand, does not heal very well. If you have edema and I'm worried about the swelling or the malposition of the incision line, then I prefer to err on the conjunctival side, because anything that you do on the conjunctiva heals very well. It's like mucosa. Okay. While on the skin, I'm more worried. While chemosis is a different ballgame. If I have chemosis, I prefer the extraoral route. Second thing is, there are hardly any indications for acute management of orbit as well as zygoma in the emergency setting, other than very, very few indications. So I think in those indications, you might have to think about these things. Otherwise, you can wait for the swelling and then decide the approach of choice. Though whichever approach you're choosing, transcutaneous, transconjunctival, done properly, like what Rahul says, plan your incision, keep it in the right line, right plane of dissection. I think all are going to heal well.
Yeah. I think the only indication of going in the orbit immediate. See, one is that the neurosurgeon wants to go in, and you have to, kind of accompany him, because you don't want the patient to undergo general anesthesia twice. Otherwise, it's a white-eyed blowout fracture, and there is hardly any, there is no chemosis, and there is hardly any swelling, and that's a straightforward transconjunctival.
True.
Venkat sir, any input on this? Venkat sir?
Praveen, hello.
Sir,
Praveen,
Venkat sir.
Praveen, I am on drive. I will come back to you later. Okay.
Oh, okay, sir. No problem, sir.
Thank you.
Any other input? Any questions from the audience? The fellows can, from their experience, they can share some comments or ask any questions to the mentors. Any questions? Okay, so I would like to shift the attention to the
Praveen, can I ask?
upper eyelid crease incision. So, what is the advantage of using the upper eyelid than your brow incision? Is there any advantage or disadvantage between the both, Rahul?
What I have noticed is, again, I would say that brow, you are creating, you're creating a crease, and the worry about scar alopecia. So I would, if I can avoid it, and I can tell you that a superior bleph, it may look difficult, but it is absolutely simple to give. It may look awkward, but it is not. So there is, because of the ease, and it's actually easy. I would so I think almost now 15 years that I would have not given a lateral brow. Okay. It's a routine not to give a lateral brow, because the chance of a perceptible scar are very high. And in a superior bleph, it is almost always that you will not get a perceptible scar. Rohit, you had some question or comment?
Yeah, Rahul, I wanted to know.
Can your voice, if you can speak a little loudly?
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of these zygoma fractures are actually have a component of impaction in them, and they're not freely mobile, oblique, easily reducible. So in such cases, are you reducing them via these approaches only, or are you using a third method to reduce them in position before the fixation?
I am a great follower of Sir Harold Gillies, and it is almost always so. I rarely use a Dingman approach from the FZ. Sometimes, very badly laterally displaced. Of course, you can use a Carol Giral, screw kind of, thing. Other fractures, I would always give always, because I'm confident. I know I'm ironing out the zygoma. I can assess the and it's not a morbid.
My second question is, am I audible, Rahul?
You're audible, Rahul. Yes,
yeah.
Please go ahead.
In both of these cases, there is a perceptible fracture of the anterior maxillary wall, and probably impingement of the infraorbital nerve after its exit from the foramen. So are you not, is the anterior maxillary wall not being viewed or reduced or got into the normal position?
So the last case, this is a CT scan of the video. So this is not the CT scan of any of the second case. What I have found out is when you
Rahul, you're not audible.
Is this better?
Yeah.
So I would reduce the zygoma well. I would not make a real attempt to manipulate the infraorbital nerve, and I would like nature to do the healing. Unless there is obvious, in certain cases, yes, but not as a routine that I would want to look at the nerve and free the nerve. I would think that I would cause more iatrogenic damage in doing so. I would manipulate the nerve. It's a bad blowout fracture. I have to work around the nerve and posterior to the nerve. I need to free the nerve. Yes, of course. But I would not look at the nerve at the exit at the fracture site, because I don't think it really would make a difference. I would feel that I would cause more iatrogenic damage, and I would worsen the nerve injury than otherwise.
Rahul, I have a question for you for the benefit of the fellows. What is your sequencing, whether you go for 2-point fixation, 3-point fixation, 4-point fixation?
Yes.
What is the sequence you adopt?
Sir, there is a beautiful article by Edward Ellis. But I feel in real life situation, we cannot extrapolate these algorithms. Lot of times I see that there is lot of comminution at the zygomatic-maxillary buttress. And in those cases, I would have a transcutaneous approach, and I would, the FZ and the infraorbital rim would be approached. But if there is no comminution, I would love to do a single point fixation whenever I feel that it is possible. Otherwise, a 2-point fixation, I would rarely nowadays, since so many years, do a 3-point fixation at the FZ, at the ZM buttress and the infraorbital rim, because I'm worried about, I don't want to strip too much. If I have a laterally displaced zygoma, I would rather give a coronal approach and address the zygomatico-temporal area and have a 3-point fixation or a 4-point fixation then. But not for a regular zygomatic complex. I would almost never do a 3-point fixation, but reserved for special situations. So most commonly it would be a 2-point fixation. Less commonly it would be a 1-point fixation. And whether I would fix the infraorbital rim or an FZ would kind of depend also on whether it's a medially displaced for this kind of a fracture. I have done a single point fixation at the infraorbital rim, probably not mentioned or not advised as a reference to do it. But I felt in this case that would be stable this thing. In fact, I have only one screw on either side, so I feel less hardware. It was a stable fixation. I would like to have 2 screws on either side whenever required, but it would not be as a mandate. So in these kind of fractures, a single point fixation would be all right, especially those medially impacted ones. Those are the ones which are stable actually. Those laterally displaced ones are the ones I would want to have 2-point fixation. I mean, I would also want others, if there's any, other thoughts or people would not agree, I also want their opinion. Or if somebody wants to add on.
In case there is a lateral displacement,
yes,
what would be the sequence of sections? How will you sequence?
Sir, I would think of, seeing and reducing the lateral orbital wall. I would look at the sphenozygomatic suture and do the FZ after looking at the FZ, lateral orbital wall, and then followed by the infraorbital rim. Sometimes I would do the reverse. I don't have a particular fixed protocol. In some cases, I would do the infraorbital rim first. So and then the FZ. If you ask me, I don't have a fixed protocol, sir, of sequencing that whether I would do the FZ first or the infraorbital rim. It would be on case-to-case basis. But I would want other thoughts. But I don't have a fixed protocol, sir. That's the answer.
Can we have the comment of the seniors?
Sir, Dr. Dirvani, sir. Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
This is Anant here. Hi, sir. I have a fixed protocol for zygomas. It is always a 2-point fixation if there is fixation. That is for primary cases. If need be, it is 3-point fixation. All my secondaries are minimum 3-point fixation, sometimes 4-point fixation. Every time I fix the FZ first after reducing the sphenozygomatic suture. In cases which are comminuted, or involving panfacial injuries, I plate the sphenozygomatic suture also. So this would be my protocol.
Right. Good.
That is what is mentioned in the AOCMF references too. But I don't stick to a protocol.
Sir, I have a question, sir. Anand sir, we often feel that in spite of seeing the sphenozygomatic reduction,
Yes.
very often the FZ is not a stable reference point for the reduction of the other segments, the infraorbital and the zygomatic buttress.
Exactly. That is why the sequencing
Yes.
is as such. Sir asked about the sequencing. So I check for sphenozygomatic reduction, plate the FZ first. If the zygomaticomaxillary suture is still intact, that is the second point of fixation for me. I don't like to fix the infraorbital rim if it is a single fracture line. If it is a double fracture line or a comminuted fracture line, then I fix the infraorbital. Otherwise, my point of fixation preferences would be FZ and ZM. That would be my preference. And the sequence is the same. FZ first, ZM next, after checking out the sphenozygomatic reduction before the FZ fixation.
Actually, the
Right.
sphenozygomatic fixation reduction was first advocated by Paul Manson. That you have a good reduction at the sphenozygomatic, your zygoma is reduced. But as Praveen, you mentioned, it's the least stable indicator. FZ per se is the least stable indicator for reduction. But sphenozygomatic is supposedly one of the most stable indicators for a reduction. My thought is that when you have a badly displaced zygoma, I would still, like a couple of weeks back, we had I would still add refracture. Not come visit my place because once then I'm committed. So I would still put wire to places, kind of get down the reduction wire.
Praveen, if you don't mind, can I just add one more small point, because I think most of the audience here is residents or young surgeons. Like what
Yes, sir,
Dr.
please,
Rahul
sir.
suggested, the sphenozygomatic suture happens to be one of the best indicators for reduction of a zygoma in three-dimensional spatial orientation. It was originally described by two people independently, Dr. Paul Manson from Maryland, who gave the transorbital approach to sphenozygomatic suture. And then there is a Jackson's method, Ian Jackson, British turned American surgeon. He gave a temporal approach. So sphenozygomatic suture can be plated in two forms. Manson's transorbitally, which can be comfortably accomplished through a upper lid blepharoplasty approach, like what Dr. Rahul said. And if you're going coronal, you don't have to search for the sphenozygomatic intraorbitally. Instead, look at the temporal side and then plate the temporal side. That is another method of achieving
Anand,
good
we are losing
sphenozygomatic
your
reduction.
voice. We lost
I'm sorry.
your voice.
I'm sorry. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir,
Am I
you're
better
audible
now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So two methods are there. Manson's method is the transorbital method, which was further advocated and proved by studies by Beat Hammer. And then there is the Jackson's approach, which is the temporal side approach, where you make a coronal incision and you want to move the zygoma. Then a temporal approach is preferred. You can even plate the temporal side of the sphenozygomatic suture for equal results. So just a point for the residents.
That's a very good information. That's I think one thing I would like to add at this juncture is that when we follow a lateral eyebrow incision, most of the times we don't tend to look out for the sphenozygomatic suture. I think most of the residents will agree that they just look at the FZ suture alone. Nobody peeps into the sphenozygomatic region at all. Any comments, Rahul, on that? You have to unmute yourself, Rahul.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. That is something which either you expose it totally or even at least at the minimum have a feel through your periosteum. We use the Paul Manson's method almost always. Whenever we are giving a choroidal incision for a hugely displaced zygomas, we follow the IT Jackson's method of going, stripping the temporalis muscle. The slight disadvantage is whenever you're retracting the temporalis muscle, you may have a temporal hollowing in the IT Jackson's method. So whenever possible, do it transorbitally.
Any further comments from the audience, fellows, trainees, mentors? I think we are come to the end of the session. It's 10:15 already. No further questions. I think we can finish the session for the day. Is that okay, Rahul?
Yeah, I would thank all of you. Your inputs have helped me, and thank you again, for all the comments. Dr. Neeraj, thank you for a good presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahul.
Before we end, I think our next presentation is going to be on 11th. I think it's from Rohit Chandra's unit. And thank you, Anand sir, Giri sir, for your valuable input, and thank you very much for joining us. So we come to the end of this session. We'll see you all on 11th. Thank you very much. Thank you for the participation, and thank you, Rahul and Neeraj, for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Likewise, thanks
See you
a
on the
lot.
11th.
All the
Thank
best.
you.
Bye, Rahul.
Thank you, sir.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shilpa ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I'll end the meeting.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.